So there's this archetype. There's this archetype of a particular kind of feminine that I understand is not unique in terms of the role she plays in society for the people for whom she is considered to be important or sacred. But she's also not so distinct as to accept out the possibility that a comparable archetype exists in other cultures. This understanding of the spring, feminine is spring, as being capable of possibility, inspiration, the muse. These things are very important. And it's very important, especially if you're somebody that embodies this, actual literally, as part of your spirit and as actually part of who you are. Your body, your capabilities, your capacity to complement, understanding that that's a phase, it's a transitional phase, that you experience it yourself, and then you mature. And as you mature, you have an understanding of what it means to go through that. And so when it appears in others, the spring emerging, and you know something about this, it gives you a kind of authority. It gives you a kind of credibility. It's somebody that's not capable of that kind of embodiment and habitation of experience does not have. Period. And even if we want to talk about things like expressions of unconventional gender roles as society changes, including in consideration of industrialization and the impact of industrialization on community, family, religion, national character, all of these matters. And even if we want to talk about understanding ourselves currently in a paradigm where transgressing traditional gender roles and expressing ourselves as some approximation of another gender intentionally and expecting to be acknowledged by others who have the embodied experience of literally living with what it means to deal with being a part of that kind of experience of the archetype, including as a masculine or another kind of feminine at a different point in their lives, that they have that kind of authority over their own bodies, over their own existences. Well, this is also important as well. So I understand that when I was younger, especially when I was a little girl, somebody identified me as a particular kind of archetype and inspired them. I've been dealing with the consequences of that. I also know that I'm 44 years old. And the kind of youthfulness and the kind of expectation of inspiration is not age appropriate. It's also completely inappropriate for any male bodied individual or anybody seeking to express themselves and identify themselves as having some form of male embodiment to think they have any right to claim the authority of the experience of that feminine for themselves. I honestly believe this. I believe we're at a point where men and women can talk about their feminine and their masculine aspects, including in a partnership with two individuals or in community or in any number of experiences where people express themselves authentically, but there's a very real association and responsibility when it comes to power and abuse of power and exploitation of the promise and the potential. And under no circumstances am I going to allow for you to try to contrive a yield on the inspiration my young feminine gave to you and your people by projecting that somebody can swap out my experience with their own. I'm not letting any old men wear around my little girl and expect for me to be all nice and sweet and conciliatory toward them. It is the grotesquest form of predation. An old man has a character of his own. It's very important. If you cannot address the world as the elder that we need, then we have a problem. You are not entitled to claim us and our experiences in their authenticity instead of taking responsibility for your own. I'm not an old man. I'm never going to be an old man. Actually, an old man. But I might be able to have some commiseration with, collegiality with, love, devotion, honor, respect for an old man. But I can't do that for an old man that pretends to be a little girl. And I can't have any respect for anybody else that allows an old man to act like a little girl. We're not role playing. We're not trying to see some sort of embodiment of experience and understand he, at some point, had a younger feminine that got wounded and he needs for you to help him heal. Grow up. It is unfortunate. The promise and the potential of my younger feminine is not available. If we trusted each other, we might be able to talk about those things we dreamed about years ago. We might be able to engage around following through on things we put into the universe, including how somebody else got a hold of them and it hurt us, our quest to go find it for ourselves and recover it. Something we found along the way that might have been foreign to us, but in seeing it, it inspired us as well. And our hope that maybe we would find where it belongs, and when we could take that to its home, we'd have our own home, and so we could go to each other's homes, and we could celebrate. So I know what you're seeking. Potentially, it could exist for you. I'm not going to give it to you while you've confined my entire existence to machinations and manipulations, where I'm only allowed to talk to one old man that acts like a little girl. And I'm also not going to allow you to try to compel me to accept that his sister is somehow entitled to my life and my sights and experience, instead of me allowing the old man to be the little girl while I have to launder all the dirty laundry all the old men in his network thought they were going to get away with. It's a very, very real, very considerable problem we have, especially in Texas. You see, you guys didn't seem to understand what it meant when you had to deal with the whole situation around the construction of that Capitol building, knowing as you do the kind of geometry you agreed to with its layout. And then you put the Lady Justice on top of the dome. She's not blindfolded. Stop trying to perform drag on the Capitol grounds and then colonize the rest of the state with your deceit. Because I cannot extend this any further than the boundaries of the state of Texas. Literally. Why? Because the authority of what you're trying to get covered does not extend any further than the authority of the state. And the state is not operating with appropriate acumen right now. It is not actually owning up to the responsibility of trying to represent itself as having that kind of authority. Why do you need to go to little girls and little boys for your policy making? It's a very real question. You don't allow young people to actually have an authentic expression of their needs. You do not provide them with the safety and security they need to be able to do so responsibly as well as productively. You do not let your young people contribute to society with an understanding they are building a foundation for the rest of their lives. You exploit them. You take from them over and over and over and over again. And your attempts to modify your economy to placate them later on have not worked. Before I returned to Texas, I understand there was an entire generation, really, of people around my age. People that were in the prime of their life, prime producers, prime contributors, that were intentionally stripped down as part of some game with the energy sector. An energy sector which itself was in intense debt. So intense, it stripped those people down, laundered it through an insurance setup that was adjudicated before the Supreme Court of Texas. Well, they were denied access to the court and remanded to an administrative proceeding. So that then, those energy companies could claim they had the collateral and the credit they needed to take out short-term loans. Those short-term loans have already started coming due. And in the last 2 years, going on 2 years with this COVID-19, you've been trying to pull the wool over everybody else's eyes. And you're trying to buy people off with teledrugs that look like pretty little girls and boys. And all in the privacy in their house, they get to enjoy themselves. And nobody's going to ask, nobody's going to tell. As long as they just play along. You're not allowed to do that. You're just not. And if you agreed that you were going to compensate your veterans or your members of law enforcement specifically with some sort of security profile on the little girl explorer, she's so pretty, and she's so cute, and she's so inquisitive, and she's so exploratory, and she likes to go places and have mysteries, and maybe you can go with her, and she'll be really sweet, and she'll say really nice things to you, and she'll be like, look at this, and then she'll give you an analysis, and it'll sound really smart, and she's so charming. And so when you go and you start rubbing her arm and talking about it, or you start stroking her hair, and she might kind of giggle, but she might also be, wow, well, now let me explore you. Kiss my ass. It didn't work. It didn't work, and that's the best case scenario that came with your security profiles that you've been running in all these background checks for the last 10 to 12 years. Because what happens if she says, hey, don't touch my hair, I didn't give you permission to touch me? You know, do you have to start your penetration testing? Stop. You understand? And stop trying to appropriate sacred iconography or mythological or cultural reference points from other cultures that you've intentionally sexualized and tried to require to modify their goals and expectations for themselves and their people in order to cover up for your crime and pay for your debts. It would have behooved you to deal with mature men and women in your own country who knew their own national standing. And in so doing, understand that it might have behooved you to consider the reasonableness of understanding what the 14th Amendment is, of understanding what the 5th Amendment is, of understanding what the 4th Amendment is, of understanding what the 13th Amendment is, of understanding what the 2nd Amendment is. Then maybe we'd have an honest reflection and engagement with the First Amendment. And then maybe you might be able to say something about how in the older time frame of your life, that you want to have a reflection on positive memories you had when you were younger, but also watching young people grow up. That their promise inspired you, including if you needed to be stern, including if you needed to take risk, including if you needed to do things that you knew you were going to have to deal with the consequences of because it was necessary to protect them while they were in that stage. And so at the end of your life, you want to be able to enjoy it in safety and sanctity. We haven't gotten to that stage of the conversation yet, and we're not going to. It's not your First Amendment right to act like a little girl and expect other people to act like a little girl because it pleasures you. It's not.